with some glee.
So he seems to have gotten, some popularity in the West recently.
Not just recently, yeah. I mean, he's had a resurgence recently.
Yes, resurgence.
Well, that's because whenever things are seen to go wrong, people reach for other options. And when, for instance, it's very hard for people to accumulate capital, it's not obvious that they're going to become capitalists. And so one thing that happens is people say, let's look at the Marxism thing again, see if that's a viable goer. And my argument would simply be, point me to one place that's
You have one task.
Well, the argument from the Marxist or the Marxian economists is that we've only really tried it once. The Soviets tried it, and then if there's a few people that kind of tried the Soviet thing.
Cuba tried it?
Well, they basically, it's an offshoot of this.
They tried
Soviet. Yes, they've tried
They
it.
tried it in Venezuela.
Yes.
So,
but
let's just quickly say, how did all these experiments go?
they did not. Well, they failed in fascinating ways.
They did, but they failed.
Yes, they failed.
And we should stress, so grossly failed. So grossly failed that they threw millions and millions of people into completely thwarted lives that were much shorter than they should have been.
Yeah, so the lesson to learn there, that you can learn several lessons. One is that anything that smells like Marxism is going to lead to a lot of problems. Now, another lesson could be, well, what is the fundamental idea that Marx had? He was criticizing capitalism and the flaws of capitalism. So is it possible to do better than capitalism? And that's, if you take that spirit, you start to wonder, that might actually become relevant in, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years when the machines start doing more and more of the labor, all those kinds of things. You start to ask questions.
We finally might get to Marx's dream of what the average day would look like.
Yes.
Well, there's going to be an awful lot of literary criticism then. If you
Well,
remember,
we'll
that's what Marx said that we would be doing in The Labourer.
But he didn't know Twitter was a thing or Netflix, so he would change.
Are there things we could learn from Marx? Plausibly, possibly. I can't think of anything myself right now. But to have a critique of capitalism isn't by any means a bad thing in a society. I'd rather that it was a critique of capitalism that showed how you improve capitalism, a critique of the free market that showed how people could get better access to the free market, how you could ensure, for instance, that young people get onto the property ladder, things like that. Those are constructive things. The people who say, well, we must have Marxism, don't know what the hell they're talking about, because that never leads to any of those things.
Haven't led in the past.
You have one.
It's never led in the past, and at some point you've got to try to work out how many attempts you make at this damn philosophy before you realize that every attempt always leads to the same thing. I mean, we could pretend that fascism has never been properly tried, and that it was unfortunate what happened in Nazi Germany, but that wasn't real fascism, and in Mussolini's fascism, didn't go all that well, but it was, a bit better, and maybe we could try a bit more Franco-fascism. Nobody would have any time for this crap, nor should they. The people who try that are reviled, and quite rightly. So why do we tolerate it with the Marxism thing? And I mean, it's a great mystery to me, the way that people do tolerate it. Always in this stupid way of saying, we haven't done it yet. If you keep trying the same recipe and every time it comes out as shit, it's that the recipe's shit.
Well, sort of, I'm trying to practice here by playing devil's advocate, practice the same idea that you mentioned, which is when you say the word Marxism, should you throw out everything or should you ask a question, is there good ideas here? And the same, it's the good, it's weighing the good and the bad and be able to do so calmly and thoughtfully.
Sure. You know this famous George Orwell comment on the Star Wars, in an article on Star Wars? You know this?
No.
That's one of my favorite quotes. George Orwell, in the early 40s, gets into an article with Star Wars. He's also Marxist. And this is after the show, 7, is when it's Marxism in the Russian forces. And this Orwell's discussion with this Marxism goes on, and eventually Orwell says, what about the show trials? And tell them what about what's happening in Ukraine and the famines and much more, and the purges and the purges and the purges. And eventually, the Stalinist says to Orwell what Orwell knows he's going to say all along, which is he says you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And Orwell says, "Where's the omelette?"
Oh yeah, so good. That's a really good.
Look at this by this stage, okay? How many?
Where's my damn omelet?
How many just messy, big, bloody, eggy piles have the Marxists created by now in country after country? Yeah. Always next time they're going to produce the great omelette. But they never have, and they never will, because the whole thing is rotten from the start. But let me just also say one thing, because Marx isn't as nice as he sounds. And that's one of the things that I try to highlight in the book, is if we're going to do this reductive thing of people in history and saying, well, they had views that were of their time, and we must therefore condemn them. Say, fine, let's do the same thing with Marx. And there are things I quote in this book from Marx's letters, not least letters to Engels, and indeed in his published writings, in pieces he was writing for the American press in the 1850s, where he has horrible views on slavery and colonialism and much more. But the main thing is, I mean, the horrible things he says about black people and the constant use of the N-word. In fact, when I was doing the audiobook for the Warner Brothers, I had to decide, will I read out the quotes from Marx or not? If I had have read them out, I'd have been cancelled, because people would have just said, you've been using the N-word so much in this passage, and you know this is it. And I slightly thought of doing it so that I could say I was only quoting Marx, to try to hit the point home. In the end, of course, I was sensible and decided not to. But Marx's letters are disgusting on these terms. Since I highlighted this in this book, and some of the media picked it up, and have popularized this thing I'm trying to put into the system, which is, if you're going to accuse Churchill of racism, if you're going to accuse Jefferson of racism, Washington of racism, and so on, what about Marx? The two things that Marxists have said since this came out has been, first of all, why are you saying this about Marx? He was a man of his time, like everyone else. And the second thing they say is, we don't go to Marx for his horrible, abhorrent views on race. They're talking about mixed race people as gorillas and so on. We don't go to him for that. We go to him for his economic theories. I say, okay, well, we don't go to Thomas Jefferson for his views on slaves. We don't go to Churchill for the precise language he used that points in the 1910s about Indians.
Or his health advice.
Or his health advice. Actually, I do go to him for that. But
that explains so much.
But let's have some standards on this. And that's why I'm very suspicious of the fact that the people don't do this with Marx, because I think what some people are trying to do, and this may sound conspiratorial, but I really don't think it is. I think that some people are deliberately trying to completely clear the cultural landscape of our past in order to say there's nothing good, nothing you can hold on to, no one you should revere, you've got no heroes, the whole thing comes down, who's left standing? Oh, we've also got this idea from the 20th century still about Marxism, the 19th, 20th century. And no, I will not have the entire landscape deracinated, and then the worst ideas tried again.
So basically destroy all of history and the lessons learned from history, and then start from scratch, and then it's completely, any idea can work, and you can just take whatever.
Well, and the thing is, there are always some people with pre-prepared ideas. And I mentioned this also with post-colonialists. The post-colonialists were really interesting, because when European powers were moving from Africa and the Far East, post-colonial movements had one obvious move they could have done, which was to say, since the European powers have left, we will return to a pre-colonial life, which in some of their places would have mean return to slave markets and slave ownership and slave selling and much more. Put that aside. They could have said we have an indigenous culture which we will return to. Almost uniformly in the post-colonial era, you had figures like Frantz Fanon, you had European intellectuals like Sartre, who said the Western powers are retreating from these countries, and therefore we should institute in these countries what but Western Marxism.
Well, it's not obvious to me that, like, the bad ideas would be the ones that emerge, but it's more likely that the bad ideas would emerge in this kind of context when you erase history, when you erase tradition.
When you erase history and you leave some ideas deliberately uninterrogated. I mean, as I say, find me 1 in 100 American students who've heard of any of the communist despots of the 20th century. I mean, name recognition there was a poll done a few years ago in the UK, and like name recognition among children, school children, for Stalin, let alone Mao. I mean, Mao, who killed more people than anyone, 65 million Chinese perhaps. How many students in America know what Mao was, who he was, where he was? Nothing.
Or the atrocities committed.
Where the atrocities were committed.
Or
and I worry about that because it means that we might have learned one of the 2 lessons of the 20th century. We think we've learned one of the 2 lessons of the 20th century. We actually haven't learned that lesson. We've learned a little bit of it, and we've not learned the other one at all. Because that's why we still have people in American politics and elsewhere actually talking about collectivization and things, as if there's no problem with that, and as if it's perfectly obvious, and they could run it, and they'd know exactly where to start.
What are the 2 lessons of the 20th century?
Fascism and communism.
Oh. Yeah. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what exactly the lessons are.
No, it's not clear. If the lessons were very clear, then we'd be better at it.
Well, one is your book, broadly applied, of madness of crowds. That's one lesson.
Well, how so?
Meaning, like, large crowds can display herd-like behavior.
Yes, be very suspicious of crowds.
Yeah. In general, I mean, you apply it in more to modern application,
Yeah,
in a sense, but that's rooted in history. That crowds can, when humans get together, they can do some quite radically silly things.
Elias Canetti is very good on that, crowds and power. And Eric Hoffer, who is a sort of self-taught, amazing, not to say autodidactic writer, The True Believer and so on, he was extremely good on that. But the reason I mentioned the 2 things, no, I mean, we should have realized the 2 nightmares of the 20th century, fascism and communism. That we should know how they came about. And we're interested in learning how one of them came about, fascism. And we know some of the lessons, like don't treat other people as less than you because of their race. That's one lesson. But and we've done some good at learning that. But the second one, not to do communism again, not to do socialism, I think we're way away from it, because we don't know how it happened, and the little temptations are still there. Look at people saying, I'm going to expropriate your property. People do things they don't like. They can't wait to take your property.
Well, there's an appealing sense. Okay, every ideology has an appealing narrative behind it that sells the ideology. So socialism or communism it seems unfair that the working class does all of this work and gets only a fraction of the output. It just seems unfair. So you want to make
they do get a fraction, yeah.
Yes. And so it seems to be more fair if we increase that. If the workers own all of the value of their output. And, well, things that are more fair seems to be a good thing.
I'd say, well, yeah, I mean, fairness is I like fairness as a term. No, I much prefer fairness because it's a much easier thing to try to work out. It's quite amorphous itself, the concept, but everyone can recognize it. So, for instance, should the boss of the company earn 1 million times that of the lowest paid employee? Doesn't seem fair. Should they earn maybe 5 or 10 times the salary of the lowest paid? Yeah, possibly. That could be fair. There are certain sort of multiples which are within the bounds of, reasonableness. I think actually that's That's the much bigger problem in capitalism at the moment, as I see it, is the not untrue perception that a tiny number of people get a lot of accrue a lot of the benefits, and that the bit in the middle has become increasingly squeezed, and is a danger always of falling all the way out to the bottom. I mean, I think in Snakes and Ladders in America, it's a correct perception to say that the snakes go down awfully far. If you tread on the snake, you can plummet an awfully long way. And the deal in the game was that the ladders took you high. And there's a perception, and again, it's not entirely wrong, that the ladders system on the board is kind of broken.
What you're saying is you're a Marxist. Douglas Marx. You heard that here first in the out of context blog post going to write about this.
I get back to this point that the way to critique capitalism, if it's gone bad, is to get better capitalism. Free markets where they're not fair should be made fair. Never decide that the answer is the thing that has never produced any human flourishing, i.e. Marxism.
Very easy to move around the US, different states, looking for work, looking for cheaper housing, looking for better standard or quality of living, looking for a place with less crime and so on. It's very easy to do this in the US in a way that it isn't in most other countries. When Governor Abbott said that, I mean, I take it with a pinch of salt, but there's a serious point, by the way, behind that. When there have been exoduses of people from, for instance, progressive states, liberal states like California in the past, you see a phenomenon that occurs in other countries too, which is very stark in America, where people end up leaving a place where the policies they have effectively voted for most of their lives come into effect, make their lives worse, and then some people who can flee to a place that has more conservative politics, but they bring their liberal politics with them. You can see that, and you can see that in Texas, where many people in California fled California. They go to places like Austin, Texas, and they keep voting Democrat. So it's I can understand Governor Abbott's slight line comment there.
Plenty of Texans feel the same way, and you look at Austin, the beach clubs of Californians, New Yorkers, it's unlike the rest of Texas. You've got a lot of the same issues that you see in New York and San Francisco. But let's hear from a New York woman about what issues really matter to her and will determine how she votes. Let's skip to a clue to what Mamdani thinks.
Is it okay that our neighbors are getting taken off the streets by ICE? Is it okay that gender-affirming care is being taken from young people who really need it to survive? Is it okay that the Supreme Court has now justified racial profiling? That's not how I want to treat my neighbor.
Now, Douglas, some may characterize that woman as an awful, that's an affluent white female leftist, and that is a powerful voting bloc. They're among Mamdani's most committed supporter base. And they can turn elections. You look at the demographics, you look at the voting patterns, and that bloc votes very left in a very consistent manner.
Yeah, in fact, of course, it's similar types of politics that are actually responsible for the government shutdown at the moment. The Republicans and the Democrats are at loggerheads on one issue in particular, which is whether or not illegal migrants into the US should be given health care. And that's the sort of position that many Democrats have in. It's the sort of thing that even 15, 20 years ago would have been absolutely disastrous policies for the left. If you go back to the 1990s and a very successful Democrat president like Bill Clinton, if he'd have said, yes, we should have open borders and anyone who breaks into the country should be given superior health care, effectively for many Americans, people would have said, did you want to not get elected? But there has been this extraordinary shift on the left. It's been a shift on the right as well, but there's been a shift on the left in recent years. And just consider this, look at those priorities of that. Gender-affirming care. Please, when it is possible in one of the world's great cities, perhaps the world's great city, staring into the face of democratic socialism, and you're saying, let's not talk about unemployment, let's not talk about illegal immigration, let's not talk about the crime, let's not talk about the homelessness, any of these things. Let's talk about gender-affirming care. Normally that is the sort of thing that would make a party of a candidate totally unelectable. Yet we do have, as you mentioned, this strain of people for whom there is just never a thought too progressive that they don't want to die on their own.
Even if it hurts them personally, that's what's remarkable, particularly with these affluent, overwhelmingly white leftist women backing the most radical elements of the trans agenda. Now, to contrast from that, we have an increasing number of young people, college kids, who are rejecting leftism and rejecting it loudly, Douglas. You wrote about this phenomenon in the New York Post.
You are of no use to me, dead.
Yes. So that's right, Lisa. There was an event in Mississippi just last week organized by Turning Point USA. And at this university, more than half the student body registered to attend the event. And there were crowds wearing in the streets for transforming from the break of day to the end of day to get into the event. It was not least the door of the Vice President J.D. Vance, but actually something that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point have tapped into. Other groups have as well, Crazy U and others in the United States. They realized that a lot of older conservatives effectively gave up on the younger generation, effectively sort of decided that, everyone goes through this liberal period for a time, and they do it when they're young, and we'll try to speak sense to them, and they'll get it when they grow up. And Turning Point and a few other organizations have realized, actually no, there are lots of reasons why young Americans, like young Australians, young Brits and others, should be voting to the right and should be interested in conservative policies. And among them, of course, the most striking is the fact that many of the things in their society, in our society, do not work for the young. And again, the left has its explanation for that. It will always say things like, well, that's because we've got to tax the wealthy more or whatever. But there are many other arguments that can be made, too, conservative arguments. And conservative arguments not just on issues that affect the socioeconomic status of young people, but also that address their urge and their desire for meaning in their life. I'm very struck by the fact, I think I said this before, Rita, that I'm very struck by the Christian element in parts of the young American right. And it's part of what I see as being a deep anchor for real and substantial things to be back on the table. The left has been very good at talking about not just specific things, but grandiose things. They talk in terms, as I've often said, of resentment, for instance. But there are other things that can be offered to young people as well, such as, again, something I've argued a lot over the years, such as urging them toward a position of gratitude. towards the things that are good in their society. Recognise the things that do work in our countries, that make our countries great, have made our countries great, and which we can have pride in. I see things like this as just little signs, quite big signs, you might say, of a change in the generations coming up. I don't think that generation should be in any way abandoned by conservatives. I think it should be spoken to by them.
Douglas, I hope conservative politicians in Australia are listening to you, because too many on the social centre right here seem to think if young people vote left, then we must do left instead of actually arguing our positions. Now, you also noted in this New York Post piece that there's been a dramatic drop in the number of young people identifying as trans. In 2022, almost 7% of undergraduate students polled in the US identified as trans. Last year, the figure was 3.6%. Seems like the social contagion is over, but here in Australia we remain an outlier when it comes to trans madness. And here's another example. Parents of kindergarten-aged children in Queensland are being asked if they want they-them pronouns for their 4-year-olds. Douglas, there you go, non-binary 4-year-olds. How do parents combat this activism?
No, I mean, first thing is, of course, that you use exactly the right term there. It's a social contagion. There may be a very tiny number of people, probably are, but a very, very tiny number of people who genuinely suffer from gender dysphoria. But most of what we have seen in recent years has been a social contagion which has been fueled by several things. One, of course, is by the media, but more importantly, it's been the social contagion push where it's been deemed to be bad to be a man, to be bad to be heterosexual, to be bad to be white, and if you add all of those things together, then if you are somebody who is, I mean, it's the same to a certain degree with women as well, but they've got sort of one little niche more on some of the social justice hierarchy, pyramid, grievance in some people's views, unless you have conservative views, obviously, in which case you're back to being a non-woman again. But just bear with me for a moment. The point is that if you deem these things to all be bad, you will encourage some people to try to find a place on the victim hierarchy pyramid. And identifying as genderqueer, non-binary, and so on has been, in recent years, clearly one of the ways in which some young people have tried to do that. If you add on to that the fact that many of them have literally been miseducated into believing that, for instance, sex is a spectrum and we're all on a sort of, slippery slope, we can go up or down, and sometimes you're a bit male and sometimes in the afternoon after a cup of tea you're a bit female, and that anyone cares. That's the other thing. And that not just anyone cares, that everybody should care. Of course some people are going to try to tick that box. It's just very interesting, this stat, Rita, that shows not only a halving of the number of people identifying as gender non-conforming. In some places it's fallen by 2/3. I think a lot of people just like that when that stuff was the peak of what sometimes wokeism was the peak of the social justice hierarchy intersectionalism. And that really is amazing. We're starting to see it in the rearview mirror. As you say, apart from in Australia, I would say to the parents, any of our centres, kindergarten like that, teach the children to read and to know what a noun is and a verb is and so on before you instruct them on what a pronoun is. Maybe wait until they're 18 to talk about that, the gender choices, or at some point later, but teach them reading and writing first, because those are the things that are going to be skills in their lives. And all this pronoun stuff, apart from being uniquely boring and so on, it is a way to just avoid doing anything real in the world. Obsess about what pronouns you put in the bio, and then you don't have to do any work. I really hope that Australia stops being the outlier it is at the moment.
Will soon arrive.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great pleasure as always.
are of no use to me dead.
Douglas Murray, let's get into the BBC. The Trump scandal. It's not isolated. It's not a simple misjudgment, but there are plenty in the UK, including journalist and editor Kevin Maguire, who can claim otherwise.
Now, I am no defender of Trump, but I'm no defender of lousy fake journalism either. And I'm sorry, that panoramic documentary is lousy, dishonest, but we should all be ashamed of Trump as a defender of the Proud Boys, the white supremacists, and all that's going on. You were taken, right? You were taken a 12 to 15 second clip in a full program, their entire full program that was broadcast a year ago, and I'm not aware of any big public complaints about it.
Douglas, what's your response to that?
Impressive.
Well,
But can
Kevin
you
Maguire
repeat your
in the UK
success?
is quite well known as a sort of left-wing blowhard. And what he said there just
Life
adds
must
to
prevail
insult
over
to injury.
death.
There really is no defending what the BBC is called to do. What Maguire does there is add to that by claiming that by throwing out other young who smears against looking white supremacists, that would find people hope. But no, I mean, he and other activists spreading their untruths. But the fact is that the BBC is being called out in a set of really, really disgraceful lies. The most prominent one is this to do with editing President Trump on January 6th to suggest that he said that he would protesters gathered together could
The battle has only just begun.
and of course all the protests did go on that day. That was not what President Bevan's remarks, and Panorama simply spliced too close together. It was a very clear impression that President Trump wasn't
I fear this struggle may be as
but that's not the
eternal
only
as
thing. This is such a huge download error by the BBC. That there are
Life
things
must
that got
prevail
lost in
over
it.
death.
One of them is the BBC's serial lie about Israel during the Israel-Hamas unbelievable way that the BBC Arabic translated this can shut the BBC has no control. Just welcome to these terrorist supporters all the time and give their anti-Israel views. And then of course there's stuff on the practice as well. This is a really wasteful moment for the BBC, and it's even more exposed to anyone who's trying to hide it.
Well, yeah, you're 100% right there. The BBC's institutional bias goes well beyond Donald Trump, goes beyond Nigel Farage and the coverage of the Middle East. Even a documentary about Bill Cosby a couple of years ago displays just how lost the BBC is and what some of the nonsense they are.
If we actually grapple with the fact that sex negativity is what causes this type of behavior,
Fought well,
then we
but the
could
war is far from
create a
over.
world where in a idyllically sex-positive world, someone is able to pay conscious
harder.
women
You are of
to
no use
come
to
and
me
be
dead.
raped so that I can get actions out. Like, get fetish on having sex with unconscious people. There's a consensual way to do that.
Well, there you go, a therapist promoting an idyllically sex-positive world where men can just fulfill their fetishes by having sex with unconscious people. What am I even hearing, Douglas?
And a place
Struggle may
where
be
people
as
can
eternal
agree
as I.
that there is a sort of non-biased, fact-based channel with all of its subsidiary channels, which you can go to get a trusted news source. And you know, it's just so characteristic of the BBC and certain other media in this age. They set up all these things like BBC Verify to try to prove fake news in other media and on social media and so on. But they're pumping out fake news themselves, as the events of the last few days have shown. I mean, it's just completely unacceptable that an allegedly non-biased platform would be shown to have extreme bias in so many cases. And the point about that needs to come out is, as Charles Moore pointed out the other day, that the bias in the BBC always goes in one direction. You know, it's never like accidentally biased in favor of Nigel Farage. It's never accidentally biased against illegal migrants. It's never accidentally biased in favor of biological reality. No. It's always the same metropolitan left-wing tropes, the anti-Israelism, the anti-Trumpism, and so on. And it's because these journalists at the BBC who used to be
A champion has fallen. Rise, my fist of vengeance. The battle champion has fallen. Rise, my fist of vengeance. Just
We've had a huge number of staff, huge number of journalists, producers.
safe travels,
How many of them are conservative? How many of the ones who have programs, who are hosts, who are anchors on radio and television are conservatives? It's very easy just to determine the bias there. And as you said, they're taxpayer funded, so they have a charter, they're obliged to be balanced. And when it comes to biological reality, as you mentioned, the trans issue, Douglas, they're not much better there
one
either,
task,
are they?
my fist. Locate the...
I mean, it's on all of these issues. You know, recently one of the newscasters got into some trouble because she had to read out a line about, what was it, birthing people, and something like that, and she sort of said, women, you know, and slightly rolled her eyes and got into trouble for that. You know, it all goes back to that thing you just mentioned, Rita. You know, how many non-left-wing liberals are in the BBC? I don't actually know now if there are any. Some 20 years ago, I knew some. I used to get together with some of them socially out of hours. I used to joke to them that the small group of conservatives
You
in the
have
BBC
one
used to
task,
meet
my
at a
fist.
pub or a bar.
Locate the Queen of the
talk about
Dead
things. I used to
and
joke that
end
they
her.
behaved 1950s
path
homosexuals.
will be fraught
You know,
with
they have to have a sort of
peril.
secret
I
code.
was made for this
and,
mission.
You know, hope that no one at work could guess their dirty little secret and so on. That's just appalling.
Time to
You know,
make the undead
at least
dead again.
50% of the country have no representation in the editorial process of presenting and much more. And again, you can tell the one-directional bias from the fact that when BBC presenters and others leave, like there's a group of them, used to be at Newsnight, they left and set up their own sort of podcast. What is the thing they do once the guardrails of the pretense of impartiality are off? They're all campaigning anti-Trump, anti-conservative, anti-Tory, left-wing activists. It's always like that. When they leave the BBC, the thin veneer that they had whilst they were at it completely disappears. And I'm afraid that's still going on. You have presenters like Nick Robinson, a well-known leftist, and doesn't really manage to hide it on air. extremely disagreeable to any conservative he's interviewing. People like Nick Robinson are trying to cover this up even now this week by pretending there's sort of no problem here really. So I don't see any sign the BBC is actually going to reform.
You know what? One of the things I love about social media, particularly X or Twitter as it used to be called, is
This is
the
the place
way
to watch.
it has removed that
Sure
video.
enough. You gotta
Because you have
bounce.
these individuals on
Check out
social
this
media
area.
putting out their opinions, and then you can see why they report the way they do. And it's one thing to be in the opinion
gotta
game
bounce.
like you and I are and state our
Time for a quick
opinions, but
exit.
when you're supposed to be a news
Time for a quick
reporter
exit.
and completely impartial, it's a different thing. And I just want to play a little clip about the
This is the place to
BBC
watch.
covers trans issues.
Now, transgender women's milk is just as good for babies as breast milk. That's according to a letter from the medical director at University Hospitals Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. The claim was made as part of a response against campaign groups. The trust referred to studies and the World Health Organisation guidance, including one case which found what it called no observable effects in babies fed by induced lactation.
Well, there you go, Douglas. Maybe you can take a cocktail of drugs and start lactating and feeding a child, and it'll just be just as good as mother's milk. I mean, really, the institutional bias is not just how they present the story and how they
Impressive.
frame it, but
Can
also
you
it's often
repeat
with the
your
guest
success?
selection and the story selection itself.
Yes, I mean, in that case, I'm not going to take you up when you're off.
Not make me regret choosing you for this mission.
Straight up martini, my God. But no, that's an absolutely classic one, isn't it? How could whatever the secretion is that comes out of some kind of the biological basis, how could whatever cocktail it is that comes out that will become full of the hormones the person in question is taking, how could that possibly be as good as mother's milk? This is the sort of thing which you see will put you past the trans extremist agenda. And they don't have to. You know, they should have taken a reasonable view the whole way along, like some of us did, which is things like, you know, let's look into this a bit more, because it seems to be, you know, there's an awful lot to look into it, and let's not make up facts. But they want to, because they want to put this whole agenda. And as I say, it's always one direction, repeated. It's never the gender oriented the direction. It's always kind of, you know, I noticed that she didn't end up saying or claiming that
I
actually
fear this struggle may be as eternal as I.
milk is actually best, and we should all gulp it down all day long, otherwise we're bigger.
Do not succumb to the chaos.
We should have had a big bolster a long time ago. But just one other thing on that, you mentioned the guests. Absolutely the case. As anyone can see, well, I'm knows on these right on these times. And the presenter is a real star, anyone of a card-carrying socialist. And basically treats anyone of argues as a concept, a waiting sentence. They treat you like you're a monstrous criminal in the dark, and they've already decided you're guilty. And then meantime, they'll get some radical left-wing lawyer, you know, who represents, you know, the most social, disgusting people in society, and they'll present them as, you know, like human rights champions and all that sort of thing. It's really transparent, and it's really difficult to broadcast and just pretend to have it.
Now, before we go, Remembrance Day was yesterday, and this clip of a 100-year-old World War II veteran, Alec Kinstone, on Good Morning Britain went viral in recent days.
What does Remembrance Sunday mean to you? What is your message?
A champion has fallen. Safe travels, adventurers. Alas, a champion has fallen.
The result is now.
That's just so terribly sad, Douglas, that someone who sacrificed so much for Britain is so dismayed by what it has become.
It was heartbreaking when he first seen. I don't know exactly, of course, what he was referring to, but I think he all made some guesses.
But the war is far from over.
He was talking also about a little bit about the lack of freedom in Britain. He mentioned freedom, and I thought that was interesting. That is noting what is happening in modern Britain.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, the British people now live in a country where the police will not bother to come and investigate their home robberies. But they turn up to thousands of households every year, arresting people, putting people in handcuffs, charging people. The things they said on Twitter that go against the believed narrative, the acceptable narrative, the BBC narrative. And you know, I don't think that does mean that our forebears were insane. But my goodness, it's sad to see that interview. And my goodness, it's sad to see what Britain has become in recent years. And just look at the fall-off. Just look at the fall-off in political leadership from the people who led Great Britain in the 90s. From all parties, by the way, consider an action or a church against what we have today. And yes, it's a very sad fall-off. Deeply sad right for that. But I hope that people watching have the same are reminded that actually we have a good
A champion has fallen.
and not just continue wrecking.
That was Murray, thank you so much.
Safe travels. Alas, a champion has fallen. Rise, my fist of vengeance. The battle
Now
has
it's time for
only just begun.
He's Losing It, and there's apparently another Wicked movie, and that means more mindless musings from Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo.
We have a listening for the queer fans who are watching this. We love you, we love you, we love you.
We love you, we love you, we love you, and ours has always been a queer place, a safe place, for every color of the rainbow, for everybody. We the Elf Rainbow Book. It's the truth. You're safe with us. We love you so much.
They get you better. Do you have a message for my youngest man? We love you too.
We love you too. Where is that camera?
Right. Now we have another mostly peaceful moment. You'll remember the original during the BLM riots. That was some of CNN's worst
no
work.
time to
And
rest.
CBS wants
More
to emulate
undead
that
warriors
fake
will
news by
soon
this
arrive.
report characterizing a violent Antifa riot at Berkeley. As you guessed it, mostly peaceful.
Yeah, things have been lively here. While that Turning Point USA event is still happening inside, protesters have been out here for hours. You can see them still here behind me. They have been chanting, just a very, very lively scene out here. While things have been mostly peaceful, there have been some tense moments. Earlier this evening, there was a scuffle that broke out where two men started fighting. UC Berkeley police had to break up that interaction. Later, someone was throwing smoke bombs.
Are you kidding me? Just smoke bombs? Really? And oh yeah, the violent Antifa thugs attacking people attending a Turning Point USA event. That's characterized as mostly peaceful, even as attendees are abused, threatened and bashed. As for her claim that just two men were fighting, well, that was wrong too. One man, a lefty called Jihad, allegedly attacked the victim who was left bloodied. And I say allegedly because he's already been arrested and charged with assault. And of course, CBS were keen to platform another lefty losing it, a woman with a septum ring who can't tolerate people with views that differ from hers.
Turning Point USA should not be here, and they are like a fascist organization, and nobody here agrees with what they are saying. And obviously, Charlie Kirk has been a big issue with like a lot of college campuses and people on college campuses. So we just think, like, I mean, obviously, I didn't really follow him a lot, but like the things that he was saying is just like vile and disgusting. So we don't want to have this conversation, and I don't think that the location should have let them come here.
Now to alleged comic Chelsea handler, and I say alleged because she ain't funny, but she is indulging in cancel culture by encouraging people to boycott an ever-increasing list of companies.
Every Saturday, they're listing 10 new companies to boycott, and they're giving you background reasons, what they're affiliated with, who they give their money to, and who is profiting off of things like ICE, ICE detention centers and all that stuff. But, so, like, I'm feeling a lot of momentum. I'm feeling really, really supercharged and happy and powerful, and hopeful. I feel hopeful again.
She feels hopeful again. You know, I kind of feel a little sorry for her, so I won't say what I was going to say, but thinking it. Let's hear now from Jon Stewart, who doesn't feel hopeful at all. He is distraught because his beloved Democrats folded, just like his beloved Giants.
No! Did the Democrats and Giants lose in the poll? I can't believe it.
War is far from
They
over.
sound the same, do
It's natural and appropriate to feel deep disappointment.
Disappointing outcome.
It was not the result many of us wanted.
Want to get the results that you hoped for and came up short?
It never feels good to come up short.
We came up short. That was a tough one.
It's the place to watch. We gotta bounce. Vengeance, Inspector's name! Vengeance, Inspector's name! Inspector's name!
We will win! We will
Do not
win!
make me regret choosing you for this
We
mission.
won't rest! We won't rest!
Now, America and indeed the world dodged a bullet, an incoherent, incompetent bullet, when Kamala Harris failed to buy her way into the presidency. Remember, she outspent the Trump campaign by enormous margin, and despite losing in spectacular fashion, she seems to think she outsmarted President Trump. She was playing three-dimensional chess.
I wasn't about to fall prey or fall into those traps. And part of his strategy
Rise, my fist of vengeance.
take me off
The bat, impressive.
our game.
But can you
and
repeat your success?
And I wasn't about to be distracted by those flames that he was trying to throw
Fight harder.
to get me
You
away
are
from
no use to be dead.
one of my highest priorities is talking to people about the economy and their well-being, their financial well-being.
Inspector's name!
And that's, so I was the game I was being played, and I
Alas, the champion has fallen.
She lost by a huge margin. She lost every swing state. She lost the popular vote, and she lost the electoral college. What three-dimensional chess was she exactly playing? Joining me now is political advisor and commentator CJ Pearson. CJ, what is Kamala talking about?
I don't think Kamala knows what she's talking about in this case, right? She was playing three-dimensional chess. She was very bad at it. Almost as bad as being politician. So either way, not going to get chess or not in politics. It's not hard to do anything.
Rise, my fist of vengeance. The battle has
Now, I'm
only just
interested in your
begun.
take on the growing conflict within conservative ranks. There's two sides battling it out. Ben Shapiro's on one side, Tucker Carlson on the other. And I want to play you a clip that has gone viral in the past 24 hours. It's Ben Shapiro who's talking about housing and affordability. Let's have a listen first.
The champion has fallen.
It's really the other person that you can't afford to live here, and you should not live here. I mean, that is a I know that we've now built up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up. But the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that. The history of America is you go to a place where there is opportunity. And if the opportunities are limited here and they're not changing, then you really should try to think about other places where you have better opportunities.
Ben Shapiro is popping significant criticism for that. Is that unfair? There's an argument that that brand of conservatism is going to alienate young voters and voters who feel like they can't really get into the housing market. That it's the privileges their parents have is not available to them.
wish to one day own a home, but fear they never will be able to. That type of humorism is not going to be what's going to work to our side. So I would say that I completely disagree with Ben on that. Because the league on best and brightest stuff, Costa Rica or the type of third world country where maybe they'll be millionaires. I don't really know what the solution to what he's proposing actually is or what that would look like.
Now, I think we hope he was suggesting that perhaps move to more affordable parts of America as opposed to some of the big cities where affordability is such a problem. But it is interesting, isn't it, that that sort of sentiment can be seen as just lacking in compassion and young people feeling like they've done the right things, they've gone to university, they've got this massive college debt, they're trying to work, and they're not getting ahead. They're falling further behind. And I think that's something that, all sides of the political spectrum need to think about. Now, the left like to portray themselves as kind, compassionate, open-minded when they're nothing of the sort. And that's something actress Cheryl Hines has discovered firsthand. Here she is chatting with Bill Maher.
The Republicans have been very kind to me from the beginning. Even from the beginning when Bobby was running as a Democrat, they weren't mean.
No.
And they never have been.
No.
And I can't say that for the Democrats.
I agree.
And
it's sad because it's not the Democrats we grew up with.
Of course, actress Cheryl Hines married to RFK Jr. CJ, Bill Maher still votes Democrat. He campaigns against Republicans, but even he acknowledges that the left has changed. Just during his lifetime, there's been a fairly dramatic change.
Yeah, these may not be the Democrats they grew up with, but these are the Democrats of today. The Democrats who completely hate free speech. We saw it just yesterday at the Turning Point USA event that happened at UC Berkeley, where they threw fire bombs and sought to assault attendees of the event. And this is the so-called, political party of supposed tolerance. These people absolutely hate dissent. They hate different ideas. They hate, half of America, unfortunately. Like, that is where we are right now. And I think Cheryl Hines is completely right. What I hope is that, those classical liberals, those old school Democrats realize that there is no home for them in the modern day Democrat Party. I hope that they, find themselves, looking at other options. Bill Maher is someone that, I feel like sometimes we give him a little bit too much credit because I think that he knows that reality. There is no home for them. But still, outside of it, but I'll hold out hope for him and hope for
Well, he's come a long way, and I've played clips of him going on insane rants, tedious, afflicted rants, and he doesn't do that anymore. He made all sorts of doomsday predictions if Trump won, that, everyone's free speech was going to be taken away, he was going to be pushed off air, he would never give up power. He's moderated somewhat, so there's hope for him. Let's just see if he's fully cured of his TDS. But during that chat, they also talked about McCarthyism, modern day McCarthyism, a real variety that exists undoubtedly where in the entertainment world, particularly Hollywood, and you are not a leftist, then it is going to impact your career. It doesn't matter how popular you are, how good you are at your job, you're probably not going to get the roles that you would get. Perhaps you won't get any roles at all. You'd be blacklisted.
I think you're exactly right. The cancel culture that is defined the left very much a lot as well. Even controversial now, with the rise of efficiency over this entire problems of everyday Americans. And I think that's exactly why, all of Hollywood made a rally around Kamala Harris and rally around Joe Biden and Barack Obama. But the American people rejected it all. Over cancel culture, over being told how to think and what to think. Why did it used to be the United States of America? And I think courage is contagious. So when you see celebrities like Cheryl Hines now are starting to ask questions, Bill Maher, starting to ask questions you previously, would never have thought. there's a lot of other people in Hollywood saying, why can't I ask those same questions as well?
soon arrive.
Now, CJ, I want to play you some footage from the New York City subway. Watch how this woman is threatened,
Check out
pushed
this area.
around, and how nobody
That's a
intervenes.
yes. Fight harder. You are of no use to be dead. Vengeance is Spectre's name.
CJ, in my mind, that's a failure in masculinity. What happened to good Samaritans? What happened to chivalry? What happened to protecting women?
You're exactly right. You know, it's a failure of masculinity, but it's also the spread of cowardice. But, you know, why does that cowardice exist? Because there's some folks like Daniel Kennedy who would have seen something like that. Yeah. Wanted to act. And then in a city like New York, would not have been treated like they do it. Would not have been commended for taking after someone that's bigger than him, smaller than him. But would have been thrown in jail and rest the ability of ever making a livelihood ever again. And so it's unfortunate that, you know, I think people have to think and double think about those things. I think we all sort of rise to the occasion and say, no, we're just not going to let that happen. But I think that we're seeing exactly the type of reaction that the conditions in New York City and their law enforcement have created, and it's only going to get worse over time. So if this is the foreshadowing of what's to come, I think that this is going to go far.
Well, yes, Mandani would prefer some sort of social worker that do a group hug as opposed to putting in handcuffs and putting behind bars, because he's not a fan of jails either. But I think you're so right there pointing out Daniel Kennedy. What happened to him is absolutely shameful, and I think it has a long-lasting impact. I think those who perhaps would have intervened will remember that case and will think about themselves. They won't step in to help a stranger when their lives could be turned upside down. Now, before you go, tell me about California Governor Gavin Newsom. He's been doing a victory tour in Texas after his Proposition 50 referendum got up. The California ballot initiative passed quite easily in the end.
But can
Why
you
is
repeat
Newsom
your success?
celebrating this win in Texas, and what was Proposition 50 all about?
Well, he's running for president. He's making that incredibly clear. And I actually have the fortune of being in California right now in Los Angeles. And I got to tell you is that the more that people actually see what the leadership has done to the state of California, the more they'll run away from him, not towards him. Trump said he was an intense state for Democrat legislation offered by Jared Abrams. The answer to what they have to do next, but it's a very undemocratic way in which they went about it. It was a way that actually defeated the Constitution, but they were able to put their property about in that Constitution. And of course, there is a multi-million-dollar effort funded by both Soros and many of his allies to do so. But here's the deal. I think that, again, as I said, more people learn about California, so I was the best guy in Maine, but I don't think the rest of the problem is probably a little bit too straight more
CJ Pearson, thank you so much for your time.
Safe travels, adventurers.
It's time for Lefties Losing It, and we do talk about MSNBC a lot in this segment. It is the mental asylum masquerading as a news network. We have an embarrassment of lefties losing it. Riches there, Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, Joe Scarborough, Jen Psaki, and this next guy, Lawrence O'Donnell, who often gets overlooked because, let's be honest, he's quite boring. But be no doubt, he's as demented as they come. Remember this goal?
Stop the hammering. Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer? Where is it? Where's the hammer?
Where's the hammer? Where is the hammer? Lawrence's latest output, here he goes on a wacky, fact-free rant. And just imagine what sort of a free-dwelling room you have to be to think CNN is too pro-Trump.
CNN is already owned by a right-wing Trump supporter and has compromised itself accordingly. The firing started right away in that new regime. That's why Jim Costa is no longer there, and others are no longer there. And everyone who remains has become much more careful in anything they might even think of saying about Donald Trump. And now CNN eagerly pays a Trump supporter to lie on CNN every day and night for Donald Trump.
Firstly, CNN is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. It's a publicly traded company. It is virulently anti-Trump day and night. And the so-called liar that Lawrence claims is degrading the station is often the lone conservative on panels of 4 or 5 pundits all leaning left. Yes, this unseemly meltdown was all about Scott Jennings. An MSNBC anchor has lost it because CNN has a lone conservative on some of its panels to provide some level of balance.
Paying Scott Jennings to lie about Donald Trump is money very well spent. Scott Jennings, who used to be an aide to Senator Mitch McConnell, was not always a rabid, lying Trump supporter. When he first started appearing on television, he was capable of criticizing some of the more extreme Trump positions, but Scott Jennings figured out where the money is and how he could get his own podcast and decided to become the J.D. Vance of CNN. And here is the single goofiest thing ever said by anyone in charge of CNN in that network's history. The lost in America Englishman who heads CNN said, quote, "Scott's like D'Artagnan. He's got his sword out, and he's got about 4 Democrats against him, but he spiked them all off. That's much more like it, I think. He's a worthy opponent, as it were."
Well, that statement is 100% accurate. Scott Jennings does typically take on 4 rabid Democrats at once and comes out on top, not because of lies or playing on emotions, but because he sticks to the cold, hard facts. Something foreign to MSNBC anchors like Lawrence. Now to a teeny tiny little agitator, 4'6", big bubble who the leftist media love to present some sort of lovable protester who's been victimised by ICE agents. But the footage suggests otherwise. Let's look at what Kim has to say speaking to the media and the behaviour that actually led to his arrest.
I was 4'6", and I didn't see what time was I going to do with that. I decided that I was going to sit. So I was sitting in the grass, and my legs were just barely in the driveway. And they came up, I think there were 6 of them. And I grabbed them, and they started to drag me across the driveway on the ground. They put their foot or something on my back, and some part of it on my neck. It was scary. We jumped across the ground and we can't see what's happening around you. They call Portland a war zone. The only people that's worked for a war zone
Let's go back to CNN. A polling expert, Harry Lincoln, had more bad news for
You might think, given that the Republicans are in charge of both the House and the Senate, that a government shutdown might actually hurt the Republican brand. But in fact, it hasn't. If anything, it's been helped a little bit. Take a look here, the shift in net popularity versus pre-shutdown. When we're looking at the Republican Party overall, that brand actually up 2 points. That's within the margin of error, but clearly it hasn't dropped. Come over this side of the screen. Look at the net approval ratings for Republicans in Congress. It's a point growing since pre-shutdown. So what we're seeing here is the Republican brand in Congress has actually improved somewhat compared to where we were pre-shutdown, despite the fact that Republicans control. And that's the math that John Thune and Mike Johnson are looking at.
Yes, Republicans and independents are not blaming the Republicans for the shutdown. That's good news for the midterms for some.
It's rallying the base for sure. Look at this, the net approval rating up 12 points versus pre-shutdown. But it's not just with the base. It's also with the middle of the electorate. Look at this, among independents, it's up 8 points as well. So we've got a situation here where Republicans with the shutdown are actually rallying their base, but it's also something that's not hurting them with the folks in the middle. Anything is helping them with folks in the middle. And this is the type of math that if you're Republicans, you like to see, right?
Yes, the math is mathing, but what is the shutdown doing to Democrats' chances at the midterms?
And so how do Democrats, how are they positioned right now?
Yeah, so, I mean, look, the generic congressional ballot, which traditionally Democrats have done really well on, and if you look at this point back when Trump was president the first time around, Democrats are up 11 points. Look at where it is now. Democrats are ahead, but they're actually only up 3 points. This is, in fact, the worst position Democrats have been on in a generic ballot at this point in midterm when there was a Republican president in the last 20 years. And this is no different from pre-shutdown. So Republicans aren't losing on this metric either. They become more popular, and they're actually in a pretty good position for them historically when it comes to the generic congressional ballot.
This is a concerning number for Democrats, you say?
This is a concerning number for Democrats because it's considerably worse than they traditionally do in midterm elections when there's a Republican president.
Marianne.
Oh, yeah. Let's bring in documentary filmmaker and commentator Ahmed Horowitz. Ahmed, shutdown isn't hurting Trump, not with the base, and just as importantly, it's not hurting with independents.
No, it's not. In fact, the Democratic brand is so low that they're actually bucking history. Historically, the government in charge is always blamed for the shutdown, but that's not the case here. Yeah, this is, I mean, what do you want? The Democrats have voted 13 times the government shut down. And frankly, look, you listen to Chuck Schumer and what he's saying when he's decrying the shutdown. What does he point to as a problem? He points to Trump helping out Milei in Argentina. Really? That's a problem? Milei is reshaping the Argentinian economy into a free market economy for the first time as a light to the entire region that they will follow. That's a problem? He talks about Trump dancing in Malaysia. Yeah, he was in Malaysia cutting deals left and right. He was in Asia brokering a peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia that is 100 years old. That's an older conflict than Israel and the Palestinians. Yeah, that's what he's doing. And that's what the Democrats are decrying as a problem with this shutdown. And by the way, the coalition Democratic Party, which has been strong so far, is now fraying. The federal union that is now telling the Democrats, you guys better stop this soon. This is being a problem for us. And at the end of next week, 41 million people will stop receiving food stamp benefits. By the way, 41 million people on food stamps, that in itself is a massive problem. That's where we stand right now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a problem. I think that's something that deserves a national discussion. I mean, there's something very sick in the country when you've got that many people dependent on food stamps to feed their families. Now, let's go to your beloved New York, where leftist rabbis are campaigning for Zoran Mamdani. Yes, they are.
Hi, Rabbi. Rabbi. Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Rabbi.
We're among the thousands of Jewish New Yorkers who've been out door knocking and phone banking to elect Zoran Mamdani. We're also rabbis.
We know Zoran will fight to make our city affordable and safe for our families.
And for our neighbors of all faiths and backgrounds.
As Jews, as rabbis, as New Yorkers, we believe that all people deserve to thrive. Zoran agrees.
Oh, dear me. Zoran agrees. What percentage of the Jewish community do you think is backing Zoran Mamdani? He's made some radical comments, and these radical comments aren't ancient history. They're very, very recent indeed.
Hi, Rabbi. I mean, Rita, you're more of a rabbi than they are. One of them literally said that they believe in God, okay? Okay. What biblical school did they go to exactly? That was couldn't be that. It has to be real. Yeah, look, I'm ashamed to say that if you look at the last three polls, 33%, on average, 33% of Jews in New York will vote for Mamdani. That is completely and utterly shameful. Maybe even more shameful is that when you're listening to this video and they go through all the reasons why they're supporting Mamdani, they didn't mention a single Jewish issue, right? This is, by the way, that 33% is driven by mostly, like you saw in that video, young women, as I call the Yenta class. But I feel like if you're going to be Jewish and you're supporting Mamdani, maybe bring up some Jewish issues. I don't know. Why don't you bring up an issue that Mamdani literally said that the boot of the NYPD is on your neck. It's laced by the idea that when you go as a Jew, whenever I hear that, I go, oh, whatever I hear next is going to be horrible and terrible, and that's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
And you say that as a proud Jewish man. Now, we may all wonder, how someone like Zoran can be so popular about to become mayor of New York City. But you hit the streets recently, and I think this next clip explains why.
Jails are so racist. They're so racist. Is it racist for a judge to say, hey, you have a history of violent crime, and to keep you because of that reason? Your criminal history should not play any role whatsoever.
I don't think so, no. And I don't know if I know anyone that's ever committed a crime.
But just to commit crime doesn't make you a criminal. Right. But the focus of the criminal system, the system, should be less on safety and more on racial equity.
You know, it's the affluent New Yorkers who are the biggest problem. It's always the people in the better parts of Manhattan who've got these wacky views, and they vote accordingly.
Yeah, and by the way, this is the reason why Mamdani said he wants to abolish jails. This is what he said. These are his words. And of course, that comports with what you heard on that video. The judicial system is racist. The judicial system is out to get black people. Well, this is why when Mamdani ran against Cuomo for Democratic nomination, he couldn't win the black and Hispanic vote. Because they understand the ramifications of those statements. I mean, the other part of that video was after you watch these crazy leftists talk about destroying and upending the judicial system, I went to Harlem. Actually, the best part is I asked one person, I go, if I went to Harlem, would they agree with you? And he goes, of course they would. So then I went to Harlem. I was there for hours. Not a single person there said that is racist. Not a single person there said you should abolish jail. They specifically said that these kind of policies would make our city, our neighborhood more unsafe. They're on the tip of the sword when it comes to radicalization and changing the judicial and policing in the city. They're the ones who feel it more than I do in the affluent Upper West Side of New York. That's why he can't win the black and Hispanic vote. He doesn't get it. He's so far removed from reality.
Now, Donald Trump received quite the reception in Japan. He loves Japan, and Japan seems to love him back. The president lavished praise on Japan's first female leader, Prime Minister Takaichi, welcoming her pledge to accelerate a military build-up. And he also signed a trade and rare earth deal in Tokyo. He's also going to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Japan. So it's been a loving today.
Yeah, he sure loves that when leaders say they're going to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. That's his jam. You know, they were late for the press conference. It was so cute because they were both watching the World Series. Hey, Shohei, let's go Dodgers. Look, yeah, this is great. This is again, this is Trump at his best. You know, the new prime minister is an accolade of the former prime minister who loved Donald Trump. He had a great relationship with him in his first administration before he was tragically killed. And this is a continuation, I think, of that relationship with that 4-year hiatus in between with Joe Biden. And I think what you see is you see him in action, right? So first of all, I think what hasn't been said by a lot of people is that historically Japan has really spent very little to nothing on defense, kind of an outgrowth of their warlike ways in World War II. But they've been spending 1% of their GDP on national defense. Well, he's going to get them to move that number up to 5%. That is game-changing. That is NATO-level spending. And that is exactly what they need to do to counterbalance China's predations. And like you mentioned before, he has been laser focused on the mineral rights deals around the world, including with Japan and other nations in Europe, to create this iron chokehold around China, the entire periphery on China. He is setting them up to make sure that China is not going to make its influence known in that region and in the world.
And he got this reception, and you mentioned the history there, the reception very different to what Joe Biden got not too long ago. He really didn't have anyone of note greeting him when he touched down. It was a very different fanfare this time around. And importantly, the president also announced that Toyota is going to be spending $10 billion investing in manufacturing plants in the US. I don't have long army, but that is a big win.
Look, no question about it. And like I said before, repeatedly, like, I'm not a tariff guy. But if using tariff as a tactic versus a strategy, I'm all for it. If you're able to use tariff to force people to invest in our country, yeah, this is the result of that.
Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time. Now it's time for Lefty's Losing It. And let's take a look here and it's hard to cope with the reality that the man they and the left is branded as some sort of modern day hero is actually popular in the Olympics. There are thank you messages on the beaches of Tel Aviv. There are thank you messages in the leading newspapers of Israel. The nation's people are grateful for peace for the rest. They're wearing top hats in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, hats that say, "Come with the peace president." And CNN not to acknowledge that there were plenty of MAGA hats being worn in Times Square. And of course, But yeah, despite all that, despite the fact that world leaders were jumping on planes within minutes of notice to be in the Middle East for this announcement, CNN anchor Jake Tapper, you know, the dude who's leading the Joe Biden commentating right only after he stopped being the Democrat candidate. Well, yes, Jake was downplaying the importance of this case.
Obviously, blessed are the peacemakers indeed, but it is worth pointing out this is a a larger peace deal about a Palestinian state of any sort, and who gets to rule the Palestinian state, and Israel gets security guarantees now, and all that. That is still TBD, right?
Yes, but because the biggest part of that is this is the first phase of this deal where the two parts of that were the ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and also the release of Palestinian prisoners.
That pathetic work there from David Tucker, but this is let's take a CNN. They have another anchor here, Christian having to issue an apology for insensitive comments against the hostages. The Israeli hostages were treated better than
They were also saying that the knife has been treated better than many Gazans because Hamas used these hostages as pawns and bargaining chips. But that is insensitive and it is wrong. From speaking to many former hostages and their families, like everyone, I've been horrified at what Hamas has done.
Yes, it was insensitive and wrong, CNN. Also wrong was what the pictures deranged Democrat accountable Jason Grover using any credit to Donald Trump for the bench.
Well, this does need to end. The terrible tragedy we've seen the last couple of years has been awful. I don't trust Donald Trump. There's no reason to trust Donald Trump. I will, of course, work with any administration that wants to achieve those things.
Oh, those Democrats are so bitter and petty, aren't they? And so are many of the journalists. And is it any wonder that Donald Trump is telling them precisely what he thinks of them and their activism masquerading as impartial news reporting? Here he is with a rather polite touchdown of a political
The world is cleansed once more. Politico, Dasha Burns.
Politico's gone bad. They've been so wrong about everything. Politico has been so wrong about everything. Let's get somebody else to ask some questions. You mind? Is that all right? Because Politico is fake news.
Now, one has to wonder whether this incredible achievement by Donald Trump will lead to a cure for TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Here is TDS sufferer and pretend token conservative on The View, Elisa Farah. She promised to wear a MAGA cap on the show, on The View, if Trump got the hostages out. Remember this?
My point when I say I'm not going to be apocalyptic, it's not changing a tune, it's not making every single thing a